Friday. Good news, huh? Now, surely you have all seen either my email or the announcement about the Canvas quiz. How many of you have already taken it? Good. Any problems? Good. Okay. Let me just remind the rest of you that sometime before 11:59 tonight, I don't care what time, but you need to sit down at a computer and log in and go to this class Canvas site and go to the first quiz. As soon as you log on, Canvas is timing you and you have 40 minutes, but it's just 10 multiple choice questions. That should be more than ample time, and it's open book, okay? Okay. Now, this weekend I will be posting a study guide for the essay exam, which is a week from today, in this room at this time. You must bring a blue book, okay? And on Monday, I will pass out some 4x6 index cards. You may put notes on that one index card, and you may bring that with you as well. Did you have a question? Did you have a question? No. Okay. Let's see, what else was I going to tell you? Okay, I've posted, there's a Canvas module that says who's going to grade your exam. If while you're studying this weekend and next week, you're reviewing your reading, you're reviewing your notes, so on, if you have questions, go and talk with the teaching assistant who's grading your exam. If their hours aren't convenient for you, you could email that teaching assistant and see if you can work out a compromise, or you can go see Ian Green, who has office hours, I don't know when, but that's on Canvas, or you can come see me. I have office hours next Wednesday afternoon, okay? And that's not all, as they say on late night TV. Ian Green, the undergraduate peer mentor, he's sat through this class 2 or 3 times. He's going to be providing a test review session on Tuesday evening, the 13th, at 5:30. I don't remember the room. It's a room in UTC. I will be sending you all an email about this with the room number, and I'll be posting an announcement on Canvas, okay? Okay, do you have questions? I'm hearing whispering. And, you know, write notes to each other, sleep, do what you got to do. But it's distracting, so please don't, or leave and go outside, okay? On Monday, I was talking to you about religion and conversion and salvation and the Enlightenment. And today I'm talking to you about war. War. War between 3 nations or 3 sets of nations. First of all, they were the Native American nations that had been here long before the Europeans knew that North America existed. And for our purposes, in terms of these wars, we are talking primarily about 2 Indian nations, the Algonquin and the Iroquois. Now, the Algonquin this was mostly a hunting-gathering tribe. When the French began to settle in what they would come to call New France, many of the Algonquin engaged with the French in fur trading, all right? And south of the Algonquin, we see the Iroquois nation. And there are 6 tribes of the Iroquois nation: the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Seneca, and later the Tuscarora. Now, the Iroquois tribes were semi-sedentary agriculturalists. They did build semi-permanent homes. And they had a form of social organization and religion, and they lived mostly around the Great Lakes of Ontario, the Huron, and the Erie in present-day New York and Pennsylvania. Some in southern Ontario and Quebec. All right. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about Anglo-Native American wars. I mean, there were many attacks, there were many counterattacks, there were many border skirmishes, and so on and so forth. I'm just talking about the really big ones, where a whole lot of people on one side or the other died. Beginning with the Pequot War. You see the Pequot Nation, Pequot Mohican, and you see that they are living near the Connecticut River Valley. Okay. There were Massachusetts colonists that knew that the Connecticut River Valley and territory adjacent to the Connecticut River Valley would probably be very fertile farmland. And so they were interested in settlers being able to settle there, but the Pequot claimed that as their land, and many Pequot lived there. Well, as you know, the Massachusetts Puritans believed that they were on a special mission. They were a city on a hill to create a Puritan utopia. And they thought that surely God intended them to have that land. So they attacked the Pequot in 1637. The colonists considered them an evil force. They weren't Christians. They probably deserved destruction. Their first attack on the Pequot, it was a massacre. They killed 300 to 700, mostly women, children, and the elderly, who were surprised when these Puritans with guns and weapons descended upon them. They signed a peace treaty with the colonists in 1638, and the tribe was dissolved. All the warriors who could be identified were executed. The women and children were sold as slaves to the West Indies, or they were given as slaves to the Mohegans, the Narragansett and the Niantic tribes. So much for the Pequot as the Massachusetts settlers moved into the Connecticut River Valley. Well, I should have had this up earlier, but you can see where the major battles were. I mean, this went on for over a year. There was the initial attack, and then when the Pequot hunters came home and they found that their women and children had been slaughtered, there was a counterattack, and so then they're at war for the next year. Now, you recall that the Native Americans that lived in the area that soon became known to the English and English-speaking colonists as Virginia, they were part of the Powhatan Confederacy, a confederacy of many tribes, a very formidable confederacy to their enemies. And their relationship with the Virginia settlers was kind of on again, off again. There was trade. They provided the English settlers food. They taught them how to grow food. And then there would be an attack. And then there would be trade. And then there would be an attack. This was in the first 10 years or so. And then the first serious Anglo-Powhatan War was 1610 to 1614. This is when Colonel de la Warr came from England and encouraged the settlers there with the new immigrants that he brought from England to raid Powhatan villages. So they did. Peace was sealed in 1914, as you can see on this slide. This was where Pocahontas intervened. And peace continued until about 1622. And that is when the Powhatans decided on a great uprising. They had tolerated these people despite their contempt and disdain, despite losing their land, and so there was an uprising to push them out. More immigrants came from England. The Powhatans were defeated, and that was that. That was that. Whoops. Oh yeah, I took that away. Okay. That was that until 1646. By this time, Chief Powhatan has died. I've told you this before. But his brother, Opachakanoff, or that's the only way I know to pronounce his name. His brother thinks they ought to try again to get rid of these English interlopers. And so they attack the English villages. The war begins. They are defeated by the British, and the peace treaty that they signed this time forces them to recognize that thenceforth they will be under English dominion, under English rule. So, well, the most devastating to the colonists and perhaps to the Native Americans. Of course, the thing that was the most devastating to Native Americans of the eastern woodlands, and certainly in Central America, the Southwest, and where the Spanish were creating colonies, the most devastating thing was disease, influenza, smallpox, to which the Western Hemisphere Native Americans had no immunity at all. Millions and millions died. But in terms of war in the eastern woodlands, Metacom's War, also known as King Philip's War, was the most disastrous, possibly for the Native Americans, certainly a very, very high death toll among the English settlers. Metacom was a Native American, and he, somewhat like Opachakanoff, was very embittered by the English presumption that was clear as they sort of took their land and did what they wanted, with no recognition or respect for the people who had lived there for generations. And so in 1675, Metacom creates an alliance of tribes, and they begin attacking towns all over New England, as you see in the slide. They attacked 52 out of 90 towns in Plymouth Colony. In fact, by the time this war was over, the percentage of English settlers who were killed in this war compared to the population of English settlers, that percentage was a greater percentage of battle deaths than in any war the United States has fought. The war ended in August 1676. Metacom was captured, beheaded. Some of his supporters escaped to Canada. Those who surrendered were shipped off to the West Indies. And the Puritans, of course, interpreted this victory as a sign of God's favor, as well as a symbolic purge of their spiritual community. Now, what I skipped over, and forgive me, was Bacon's Rebellion. That was both an Anglo-Native American war and a civil war within the colony of Virginia. There are two different stories about, do I have a slide? Nope. Oh, you can see the many attacks and King Philip's War. By the way, this term King Philip's, the English referred to Metacom as King Philip. And it was a term of derision. They were mocking him. Oh, King Philip. Nonetheless. Nope, not there yet. So Bacon's Rebellion, you've read about it in your text. The version that I'm most familiar with is that in the late 1600s, there were a number of settlers, there were a number of immigrants, English-speaking people, in Virginia colony who had been indentured servants and they had completed their servitude. But at the time when they completed their servitude, the colonists of Virginia had run out of land to give them because they had made an agreement with the Susquehannocks that they would not take land beyond the Susquehannock River, which is what the Susquehannocks claimed. And that was to maintain peace with the Native Americans on the English frontier. Well, okay, that's good, but there are these men, indentured servants, recently freed, they have no land. How are they to make a living? It's not as if the farmers in Virginia are paying hired hands, no. They have other indentured servants, or increasingly, they have slaves. So they're not interested in paying hired hands. So what these men do is they sneakily squat on the edge of this or that planter's land to try to grow enough tobacco to sell and enough food to feed their family. And then they're just very discouraged. So they decide that they are going to take some of the Native Americans' land. If the Virginia House of Burgesses does not have the courage to face down the Native Americans, after all, we're Englishmen, they will. And so they crossed the Susquehannock River. They began fighting with the Native Americans, and they're not doing so well. They retreat back into the colony. And the people that they're most angry with are the landed gentry of Virginia, because many of them have by this time, lots and lots and lots of land. And they did not use their political power to find land for these landless Englishmen. And they did not use their military power to support them. So the landless Englishmen began, led by a man named Nathaniel Bacon, they began attacking the English gentry, and there is a civil war. All right. Well, the rebels lose that war. They've made their point. The House of Burgesses does make some arrangements for future white indentured servants who have fulfilled their service, and they do renegotiate things with the Susquehannocks. So those are just a few examples of wars between English-speaking colonists and First Nations peoples, the indigenous peoples. And all of these lands you will recognize, all of these wars you will recognize are about land, land, land. So too, what we call the Imperial Wars, they are about land. More specifically, they are about who's going to control what land in North America. England has claimed land in North America. The French have claimed land in North America. The Spanish have claimed land in North America. There's the New Spain, there's the New France, there are the English colonies. Beginning in 1689. Now, wait, let me not go there yet. All of these wars I'm going to talk about And you do not need to remember the specific dates or names of any of these wars except the last one, which we call the French and Indian War. It's also called sometimes the 7 Years' War, as is another one. Okay. The thing about these is that these were European wars. European nations were fighting each other in Europe. What I'm talking about is the North American theater of the European War, okay? Now, the winner had to win in Europe, and the winner had to win in North America against the colonists of the people the nation that was defeated in Europe. Do you understand what I'm saying? When I say the North American theater, like in World War II, there was the war in Europe, there was the war in the Pacific, and we talk about the European theater of the war and the Pacific theater of the war. All right, so you know what I'm talking about. So, in Europe in 1689, there was a war that was called King William's War. That lasted for almost a decade. It ended. Nothing was permanently settled. And in 1702, you will recall that Queen Anne, the daughter of King William and Queen Mary, that's Anne, she was queen then. War breaks out again. And in Europe, it's called the War of Spanish Succession, because the incident that sparks the war is who is going to inherit the Spanish throne. And I can't explain to you why that becomes of concern to the English or the French, but it does. So, there is a North American theater of that war. And at the end of that war is between, in North America, that war is between the Spanish. There are Spanish colonists in Florida. There are a few Spanish colonists in the southern part of the Carolinas. And then there's New England, and there are English and French settlers in Newfoundland. And they're fighting. Well, that war is over in 1713. There's a treaty. And then there's King George's War, the War of the Austrian Succession. This is an extension of Europe's 9-year war, and it's part of the conflict between the English and the French in North America, because in 1750, or after Queen Anne's War, you can see who claimed what territory. All the blue, that is territory claimed by France. It is not densely populated at all. It is very sparsely populated. France created several forts. There are a few French soldiers at the forts. There are French communities up in what we call Canada, Quebec, Trois-Rivières, Montreal, so on, Acadia, and what we call New Orleans, or places in Louisiana. But it's not at all densely populated. And then there are the British colonies. They're in that pinkish orange. Now, by our standards, we would not say they're densely populated, but there are certainly many, many more, there are hundreds, thousands more people living in the English colonies of mainland North America than in the New France. And then there's territory claimed by Spain. Now, so far, all of these wars, as they proceeded, they moved inexorably, as it were, to the British advantage. This was a reflection of a greater population. Now, 100 years before, The Spanish certainly had the military advantage, but now it's mostly the British and the French that are fighting each other in North America, and the British decisively have the advantage because of population and because of greater productive capacity in England and in the colonies. And in most of these wars, England and France, sometimes the Spanish, had Native American allies that joined them in their fight. And they encouraged Native American allies to join them in their fight by providing them weapons and making them promises, or if they had long-standing trading practices with the Native Americans, with a certain group of Native Americans, it was in their interest to see that the power upon whom they have become dependent in terms of trade wins, or at least doesn't lose. In the 1840s, the Ohio River Valley becomes the focus of conflict. Any river valley is fertile land. Now, you can't see the Ohio River Valley on this map. But you'll see other maps, perhaps there's one in your text, where you see the Ohio River Valley. If you're looking at this map, the Ohio River Valley begins in some of the yellow territory and extends to some of the pink territory, okay? Both the English and the French wanted to control the Ohio River Valley. And the British and the French are both competing for trade with the Native Americans who live around the Ohio River Valley. So, the British and the Iroquois first chased the French out of the Ohio River Valley at the end of the previous war that had been called King George's War. But the French Canadians return to the Ohio River Valley with more backing and supplies and men from France. And they intend to oust the British. And so, it's a war for control of the Ohio River Valley, as you clearly see. Now, in 1754, the Virginia governor, and Virginia is part of those yellow colonies on the Atlantic coast. In 1754, the Virginia governor, he's as eager to defeat the French as anybody. And so he sends a young officer, George Washington. Now, a young officer, this is 1754. In what army would he be a young officer? There's not a U.S. Army. He is a young officer in the British Army. And some of the British Army is stationed, George Washington grew up in Virginia. As he was growing up, he always wanted to be in the British Army. My goodness, they looked so fine. And they won most of their contests. And they were tough. And he wanted, when he grew up, to be a British Army officer. Well, he is. And the Virginia governor sends him to take soldiers into the Ohio River Valley to expel the French. But the French and their Native American allies, they defeat George Washington at a place called Fort Necessity. Now let me see if I can. Yeah, you see Fort Necessity right there? You see it? Okay. Now this map, the writing is a little more clear. Okay. And you see this striped area, that's the contested territory. That's the contested territory. That's what Britain and France are fighting over. And the contested territory down here, that's what Britain and Spain are fighting over. And then you see the different colors representing the different nations' claims. Okay, and the Ohio River Valley isn't marked on this. Okay. So, George Washington is defeated. He's defeated. Oh, that's a bad start to a career as a British Army officer. So, the colonists and England know that, okay, we're going to be in for a long fight in Europe and in North America, and we are determined to defeat the French in North America. We have done so much more in North America than the French have done. We will not be deterred from our claims. So, representatives from 7 of the colonies, they meet together in Albany, New York, and the purpose to meet is to talk about the war and to see if they can play a role as representatives from their colonies, to see if they can coordinate their colonies' war effort, if they can coordinate their colonies' alliance with the British to expel the French. Well, the Albany Conference, here's what comes out of it. It proposed a wartime union of the colonies, just in order to win the war. And an intercolonial government of this wartime union to levy taxes and to coordinate the war effort against the French and their Native American allies. That's the proposal that comes out of the Albany Conference. But the representatives go back home, and not a single colonial assembly, excuse me, not a single colonial assembly agrees to this plan. None of them. They're concerned that this intercolonial union, even for just during wartime, is somehow going to mitigate, lessen their independence as Virginia colony, as Massachusetts colony, as South Carolina colony. No, we'll stand on our own, thank you very much. Okay. Well, fortunately, the British are determined to destroy the French forts. The French, as I said, had built many forts as they explored the rivers and so on. They had not created many settlements. There is not much French population, but they were big. They were claiming that territory, so they were going to build a fort to show, that's France. So there are many forts, and I'll go back. Yeah, you can see the French forts here. Okay. The French forts are the little triangles. There are many of them. So that's the British Army's plan. There is, in that disputed area where the French say, that's ours, and the British say, no, that's ours, but there are French forts there. The British plan is to destroy the French forts in that disputed area that the British claim. So, there are several regiments from the British Army in the colonies fighting against the French and their Native American allies. And the colonists are fighting sometimes as an adjunct to a British regiment, and sometimes just on their own, but going in the same direction and fighting against the same people. Well, in 755, the British Army, with hundreds of colonists, moved through present-day West Virginia, and they captured Fort Duquesne. Fort Duquesne is near present-day Pittsburgh. Let's see if I can find it. I can't. Okay. Oh, no, there it is. See? Fort Duquesne. Oh, and here's the Ohio River. I told you it was there. So, the British Army with hundreds of colonists moved to capture Fort Duquesne. Well, en route, the British were ambushed by the French and their Native American allies before they even get to the fort. And bless his heart, it's poor George Washington that has to lead the retreat. Well, many Ohio Indians, Native Americans that lived in this Ohio River Valley area, as far as they can tell, the British are a bigger threat to them than the French, and you can see why they think that. The French got along with the Native Americans, for the most part, in places that were called the New France. The British, no, they just wanted their land. They didn't care about getting along. They just wanted their land. So, Native Americans, in whatever territory is claimed by the British, are more frightened of the British than the French, who are contesting, challenging British claims about that territory. What's so funny? Okay, I saw several smiling faces. Oh well. Not that it was that, but I thought, no, I'll turn it off while I'm here. Okay, so the Delaware, these are Native Americans that live in Ohio. These are different tribes. The Delaware, the Shawnee, the Iroquois, and other Indian nations join the French, and they attack Anglo-American settlements on the frontier from Pennsylvania all the way down to Virginia. Look at this. Here's the frontier from Pennsylvania all the way down here. There are attacks by the French army and the Native Americans of these several tribes. They capture thousands of colonists. Now, there is a long history. In the long history of wars between the English-speaking colonists and Native Americans, there is a long history of English-speaking colonists who were captured and taken away. And there are books of captivity narratives because some of these people came back. They were ransomed back. Well, some of them didn't want to come back. Most of them came back, or many of them came back, but while they had been with the Native Americans, they hadn't been tortured. I mean, the Native Americans captured them because their tribe or their community had experienced significant depopulation, either because of disease or war. And they're trying to increase their numbers. And they want these captives to marry and be fruitful and multiply and so on. Okay. So, keeping up with my maps here. Between 1757 and 1758, you know, the war had been going badly. George Washington leading 2 retreats of British Army regulars. And so 1757 and 1758, in the North American colonies, the British and the English-speaking colonists lose battle after battle. And then the British realize they have got to significantly ramp up their support for the war in North America, significantly. So they send a much expanded British army to capture Louisburg in 1758. The French pull back. Louisburg is north in what you and I would call Canada. The French pull back. to what we know of as Quebec and Montreal. In 1759, see, now the British are on the offensive. In 1759, the British seize and control Quebec. And the next year, they seize and control Montreal, two significant French colonial cities. Now, Spain entered the war to give aid to the French. But the British captured Spanish colonists and sort of took over temporarily the Spanish colonies, some Spanish colonies in the Philippines, and they took over Havana, Cuba. Cuba was a Spanish colony. Thousands of English-speaking colonists in North America fought in the French Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Well, it ends, and the British are victorious in 1763. And the official treaty that ends the war is the Treaty of Paris. Okay. And the Treaty of Paris, I mean, all sides, France, England, Spain, they have to agree to this treaty. And according to the treaty, all the lands east of the Mississippi River, look at this. Well, you can't see the Mississippi River, but you'll see it on a map in a minute. But all the land east of the Mississippi River, that's that disputed territory that the French claimed. All that land, that's British. France lost all possessions and all claims in North America, but France regained the West Indies sugar islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique. That was it. France lost New France in what we call Canada. That's now British territory. That was then British territory, still is. Part of the British Commonwealth. Spain, they had allied with the French. The French lost. The British are the winners here. So Spain has to give something up too. And so Spain must give up all claims to what had been called Florida. And in return, the British said, okay, we didn't want the Philippines, we didn't want Cuba, we just needed to get your attention, okay, and to have a bargaining chip, so, all right. Now, this is a great victory for Britain, for the British Empire. This is a great victory for the colonists. They did not want the French to win. They did not want the Spanish to win. They did not want the Native Americans to win. The French and the Spanish are Roman Catholics. Oh my God! And the Native Americans are heathens. So, and remember at this time, the English-speaking colonists in North America are still very admiring of the British. They're very proud to be part of the British Empire. The most productive, the most economically successful empire in the world, and the empire in the world that grants and protects the most freedoms and liberties to its citizens. So, this is a great victory for the colonists. They feel like they participated in this, and they're grateful to the British Army. Yes, a great victory, a great relief. Well, it's not over. It's not over because the Native Americans that live still in the Ohio River Valley, despite the defeat of their French allies, and they're very angry about this, they still don't want to give up their homeland. Okay, so the French with whom we were fighting, they didn't win, but I don't care. This is where we live. We are still not giving up this land to the British, even if we have to continue the fighting. And that's exactly what they did. When word arrived to the Native Americans that live in the Ohio River Valley area, that the British had won, and that now they needed to transfer their loyalty to the British monarch, George III, they were outraged. George III, no, we're our people. We've been here for a long time. I mean, you can imagine. So, English dominance in North America meant the construction of new forts, English forts, and it would mean, of course, the movement of new settlers into traditional Indian lands. Now, British traders, they had traded with Native Americans, but they did not have a good reputation. Their reputation in sort of trade negotiations with Native Americans was not as good as the reputation of the French in North America. And the British arrogance was well known and despised among Native Americans. They knew that the British and English-speaking colonists expressed nothing but contempt for that way of life. And then, the new North American governor, Sir Jeffrey Amherst, announces that he's going to discontinue the practice of presenting annual gifts to the tribes, an event that had been long honored by the French. He's like, no, that's a French thing. We're not going to do that. So they're very, very upset. A Native American named Nealon has a vision. This happens several times with Native American nations in North America. He has a vision that, okay, we've got to get rid of these people, and we have to return to our traditional ways. We've given up too much. We've given up too much land. We've assimilated too much. We go back to our traditional ways, our traditional religion, and we drive those people into the sea. Well, the Ottawa chieftain, Pontiac, is the leader in this.